for the people you are mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
the applications to interview ratio you are seeing is about 8 to 9%.
Obviously, getting the actual interview is like the main part, and even getting your foot in the
Yeah,
door. Like, if you're not
yeah,
getting interviews, you're not going to be able to get your foot in the door. So, it is by
yeah.
far the biggest, like, barrier, I would say, for people. You need to understand the strategy that happens from every angle of applying to jobs. On one hand, there's the resume. Like, the way I look at it is that there's actually two sides of the equation, right? There's the resume, and then there's what kind of jobs you're applying to. The whole thing with the
Yeah.
resume is like you're basically trying to do the best translation as possible of your experience in a way that relates to data hiring managers. I teach something called like the minds framework for how to structure a resume that really brings these elements to the surface, right? I think
Jobs, when I look at on LinkedIn, a lot of them have 1,000 plus applicants.
that counter is actually not accurate. It's just the number of people who actually pressed apply who went on to the next page. My students are making these opportunities for themselves because they understand deeply like what it is that they bring to the table. They find organizations that need that and they learn how to pitch themselves to create that opportunity for them. The first thing I would just say about networking is like try to look at it
Hmm.
as just making connections with people who you are
Hmm.
genuinely curious about, either about helping them or learning about them. Most people don't realize that the portfolio project is not going to get you the job. It's not even really
Hmm.
going to get a hiring manager to pay attention.
Today we have Christine Jiang on the call. She is a former director of data at Vimeo. And over the last 2.5 years, she's been running Analytics Accelerator, where she helps people get data analyst jobs. And I was really looking forward to this conversation because Christine is one of the very few people who post content on YouTube, and the content is very meaningful, very helpful. And the main reason for that is that her content is grounded on real life examples and case studies, and it is very to the point and useful. So I was really looking forward to that conversation. And in this conversation, one thing which I really wanted to zoom in is that recently she said in one of her YouTube videos that the people she's mentoring, they are getting 8 to 9% applications to interview ratio, which is pretty phenomenal because in my experience most of the people get that ratio to about 1% at max. So I really wanted to go deep into the technical stuff of how she's able to get that kind of a tremendous ratio for her candidates. And if you are someone who is trying to get a job in data and are demotivated because you see a lot of applicants, you would really enjoy this conversation. Hey, Christine, thanks for joining me today. I was really looking forward to this conversation. And to begin this dialogue, I really wanted to start by something you said in your recent video that for the people you are mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
the applications to interview ratio you are seeing is about 8 to 9%, which
Mm-hmm.
is phenomenal because based on my experience and the people I've been having conversations with, it is like 1 to 2% max. So I really
Yeah.
wanted to deep dive into what are you doing, which is taking it
Yeah.
from 1 to 2%, which is average, to all the way to 8 to 9%.
Yeah, sure. One of the juiciest questions I think that people are wondering about, because like obviously getting the actual interview is like the main part, and even getting your foot in the
Yeah,
door. Like if you're not
yeah,
getting interviews, you're not going to be able to get your foot in the door. So it is by
yeah.
far the biggest like barrier, I would say, for people. So there's a few things going on here. First of all, that 8% is obviously an average across students, right?
Hmm.
Some people actually have
Yeah.
much higher ranges. Some people have a
Hmm.
little lower, and there's reasons for that too. But like
Yeah.
8%, the first thing I would say is like for everyone who's watching, don't anchor yourself too much on like it needs to be 8%. It's more so
Yeah.
that you need to understand the strategy that happens from every angle of applying to jobs. On one hand, there's the resume. Like the way I look at it is that there's actually two sides of the equation, right? There's the resume, and then there's what kind of jobs you're applying to. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of times people focus so much on the resume. They're like, if I can just pack my resume with keywords, if I can make it look really nice, if I have my portfolio project, if I have the right job title, then when I send it out into the void, then it will pick up some resume. It will pick up some noise. It will hear back. But that's only half the equation. So I guess first I'll talk about the resume side of things, like what we can do there to just make your resume as good as possible. The whole thing with the
Yeah.
resume is like you're basically trying to do the best translation as possible of your experience in a way that relates to data hiring managers, right? The translation is really important when I say how it relates to data hiring managers, because you might have very impressive marketing experience, you might have super impressive finance experience, impressive operations experience, startup experience, healthcare experience, nonprofit experience. But if it's not translated using the
Hmm.
language that data hiring managers understand, it will get stuck. So there's a few things here. Number one, I teach something called like the minds framework, for how to structure a resume that really brings these elements to the surface, right? I think it stands for metrics, insights, narrative, design, and skills. And so there's a YouTube video, separate video, which maybe we can like link at the bottom, for how to
Yeah, sure.
structure your resume to have those main elements. That's one thing. That's the overall narrative of the resume, right? Then is the actual bullets. The bullets of the resume, I teach something called 3D bullets, which just means that there needs to be three dimensions to every bullet. One of them is the data, one of them is like the domain knowledge, the industry, and then the other is the stakeholder. A lot of times people in their resumes, they just talk about the technical stuff. But because everyone has technical stuff these days, it just doesn't really stand out. Like what we're really looking for is what was the impact it made on other people, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things here. I know people are like, well, what if I don't know what the business impact was? What if it wasn't a large data set? Like all these different questions. There is still always a way to at least maximize your experience and make it like translate it as much as possible, right? So the main
So,
thing with the
Christine,
resume is like,
uh,
yeah, go ahead.
real quick, so what is the average profile of the people you're mentoring? Because I think that will help us
Yeah,
anchor. Are there people who have a
yeah,
lot of
totally.
experience, or it's like newbies, or where do they stand
Yeah,
on
great
average?
question. There's like three main buckets of people. It is focused on people who are trying to break into data, right? So it's not really
Hmm.
people who have a lot of experience in data. Usually
Okay.
there are people who are applying to jobs that have, it says 0 to 3 years of data analytics experience, but there's three main buckets of people. One of them are like students. They recently graduated from grad school or undergrad within the last 2 years and they're applying to their first job. Then there's another bucket of people who are more like career transitioners, and they're people who come from a variety of different kinds of industries. They're people who might be a little bit older, they have a little bit more corporate experience. And then there are also people who are, they're like two steps away from a data job. Like they're older, but they don't have corporate experience. Let's say they were teachers, right? Or they worked in like a hospital, like they were doctors, or they were in academia for a long
Yeah.
time. And so for those
Hmm.
people, each of them, they have slightly different approaches, but these principles all apply across the board. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah. And considering that these are the people who do not have prior background exactly to the kind of jobs they're applying, and they
Hmm.
are having
Hmm.
such a successful, I think that's very impressive. That's because a
Yeah.
lot of job descriptions, jobs when I look at on LinkedIn, a lot of them have 1,000 plus applicants, right?
Yeah.
So I
The
mean,
thing is
I'm
that
not
that
actively
counter,
applying, but when I look at that number, it looks very
yeah,
scary, right?
yeah,
Uh,
totally. That counter is actually not accurate. It's just the number of people who actually pressed apply, who went on to the next page. It's not the number of
okay,
people who actually applied. So yeah, it's a
okay,
proxy for how many people applied for general volume, but I
okay.
just tell people like don't really read too much into that number.
Hmm. Okay, good to know that. Yeah, because a lot of people sort of are taken back by seeing that, okay, what are my odds? And when you look at it, also, if you have LinkedIn Premium, it shows you these many have PhDs, these many are senior and director levels, right? And so if
Yeah.
you are a
Yeah,
newbie or
totally.
just getting into the data field, you see, okay, what are
Yeah.
my odds, right?
Yeah. So that
Interesting.
actually leads me to the other side of the equation, which is about the kind of jobs you're applying to. If you have a resume that doesn't have corporate experience, it doesn't have any data related experience, and you're applying to big companies like Spotify, even for an entry level data position, it's just not the right job for you yet, right? So if you're at the place where you're intimidated by having thousands of other applicants, it probably indicates that you actually haven't worked up the right level of experience to really stand out for that
Hmm.
job yet. You want to be in a
Hmm.
place where you're like, this job actually uniquely fits me. So the other
Hmm.
half of that 8% conversion rate is that we are understanding what kind of job is actually right for you. What are the hybrid roles that maybe have like they use your domain knowledge, they use a little bit more of your experience with stakeholders or like very specific experience that you have to actually make you stand out rather than being like some cookie cutter data analyst role that everyone is applying
Hmm.
to.
Yeah, interesting. So let's say if someone is coming from, as you said, 2 degrees of separation from a data role. Let's say someone has a
Hmm.
teaching experience in elementary school.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
when you are, I mean, pretty much anything they have done is it's like very hard to translate into data related, right, expertise. So how would you take that person's resume and craft it, and then based on the previous comment you had, which is that not everyone get 8 to 9%, someone are on the lower side, someone on
Hmm.
the higher side, where do you think that example of a elementary school teacher would fall?
Yeah.
On the lower
So
side?
let's take a teacher for
Yeah.
one example. Actually, in every cohort of mine, I usually have someone who is an educator in some way. So that's a good
Okay.
example.
Yeah.
Um, So there's a few things here. When it comes to the actual resume, first of all, we have to think about what are the elements of that job experience that actually do translate. Like every data job is using skills that we use in daily life, communicating with other people, negotiating deadlines,
Hmm.
managing projects, empathizing with other people, being creative about how to use certain tools. Like these are skills that when you see them on a job description, it sounds so much more specific than it actually is. Like we use these skills
Hmm.
all the time. And so
Yeah.
even in a teaching job, I love that job because it's like you're communicating with very non-technical stakeholders who are your students and your parents and the other teachers in the department. So number one is every job probably has some element of soft skills that you should pull out and be able to
Hmm.
explain like in data jargon, right? Communicating with non-technical audiences across
Yeah.
students, department leads, and other teachers and parents. And then also, every job has a lot of jobs have something relevant where they're working with tools, right? So a teacher is building a curriculum, they are building presentations, they
Hmm.
are maybe designing different projects for people. So that is something that is like in the middle of being data adjacent that is still useful because it tells me a little bit about your ability to use different tools to create a deliverable.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the thing is like that you basically want to maximize that teaching experience for what it is, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
then you do likely need to one of two things. One, get an experience that is some bridge in the middle between the educational experience, which is not corporate and it's not technical, to a corporate technical role. So that's where I
Hmm.
tell people to look at internships or volunteering opportunities or like contracting opportunities where they have the opportunity to actually do technical work for a stakeholder. And then that now adds like 30% to your resume where you say, like, you're a contract data analyst, you're a volunteer data
Hmm.
analyst, you're a program data analyst. Like students in my
Hmm.
program, they have the opportunity to say that they're a program data analyst by being in this program for 3 months. And then that now translates their resume to now be a data analyst resume where they were 2 steps away before. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that each person needs to reflect on what is unique about their experience that they bring to the table. And from that understanding, then go out and look for jobs. Like, you don't want to be like, I want to be a data analyst. You go out and you look for any data analyst job. For
Yeah.
teachers, there are some really compelling like elements there, right? It's like, okay, you know how to relate to a variety of different kinds of people, you know how to empathize with stakeholders. Like, what are the versions of data jobs that maybe use your educational domain knowledge that also really care about these communication skills? Look for those jobs. You might have to go to like some more niche job boards, you might have to look up different kinds of job descriptions and job titles, but when you see those job descriptions that really suit you, instead of just going the cold applying route, you go with like a really strong networking message. So that's the other thing I didn't mention, which is like the strategy with which you apply is also really important. It's not just about cold applications, but more like how do you target talking to the right people so that your experience as a teacher isn't a disadvantage, it actually stands out.
Yeah. Okay. So as you said, there are 2 parts to it. One is the resume, and that second is where you're applying. So now I sort
Mm-hmm.
of get a sense of what are the things they can put into the resume. And then you're saying
Mm-hmm.
in terms of where they're applying, it could be not directly to a data role, but a corporate non-data role. For this particular person, this would be your suggestion. And when we talk about contracting data roles, I think even there is a lot of competition unless you are sort of doing it
Mm-hmm.
for free.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when we talk about nonprofit or unpaid internship, So
Mhm.
these people in your cohort, do they do it on part-time basis, or they just leave their
Mhm.
job and then start doing it? So
Yeah.
I'm just going into
It's a
the
mix.
weeds of
Yeah, yeah, it's
how
a
do
mix,
people do
and I
it.
can
Yeah.
talk about some stories to make it more concrete. So, like, some people are working full time, then they do a volunteering data analyst role on the side, right? Part time, but then
Mm.
it really helps their
Yeah.
resume. One
Yeah.
example of a student who's in my current cohort, she is a full time caretaker. So she wasn't working for the last 2 years because she was taking care of her kids, but she has experience in healthcare. And so she's trying to like use that angle to get back into corporate data work. And so
Hmm.
her resume actually talked all about that healthcare experience, talked about her domain knowledge there, and it actually had a section for the career break. Then to acknowledge it, then she took that resume and actually went to her local hospital and also her student's school and pitched herself
Hmm.
as a data analyst who can help them
Hmm.
understand their insights from their data of like their healthcare data or like the student
Yeah.
enrollments. And
Yeah.
so she's now doing two contract positions where
Hmm.
one with the hospital, she basically made an internship for herself. And then with the
Yeah.
school, she basically made a contract role for herself. So now she's like working as a data analyst. I think she is also getting paid for it. And she now has
Hmm.
these two experiences that now cover the career gap for the last like 2 years because they say that she was
Hmm.
working as a data analyst. So I
Hmm.
think a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know how to apply to contract work. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much competition on Upwork, but my students are making these opportunities for themselves because they understand deeply like what it is that they bring to the table. They find organizations that need that and they learn how to pitch themselves to create that opportunity for them so that they
Hmm.
have a work experience that is not just a data experience, but it also really suits their interests.
Okay. Interesting. So when you said contract positions, um, what immediately came to my mind is that there are some contract roles with consulting companies. Okay, so you're not talking about
Mm-hmm.
that. And then the obvious route is freelance work through Upwork, etc. Again, there's a lot of competition,
Mm-hmm.
and so you're saying that based on their prior expertise, for example, the example you gave of
Mm-hmm.
healthcare experience, now that person would cold reach out to
Mm-hmm.
people in the health industry that I'm looking for some sort of a role. So that's the route you generally advise.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of going about it. Some people do get contract roles. Like some people do get like consulting data analyst roles, right? I'm more so talking about the people who have a less easy path, which is, how who this program is actually built for, how they do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so for those people, yeah, it's a mix of things. It's a mix of networking where like
Hmm.
once you have a strong portfolio, once you have a strong resume, a strong cover letter, it's quite
Yeah.
impressive to go to someone who has a lot of data, whether that be a small business, someone who has like a
Hmm.
social media account, and be like, I can
Yeah.
help you with your data. Here's
Hmm.
what I can do.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think the first part of that puzzle is actually building the data skills, building a
Hmm.
portfolio so that you know what you have
Hmm.
to offer. So that when you go to
Yeah.
someone, you're not just being like, hey, can I do a data analyst work? You go to them with a very clear pitch of the value that you can bring.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And the 8 to 9%, again, going back to that number of, so these are the people who applied on posted jobs, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
It's
Okay.
again, it's a
Okay.
combination. So the strategy is like applying to posted jobs, one, applying to the jobs that are right for you. So being targeted in your
Yeah.
search, right? And then also using a networking strategy. When you do that,
Hmm.
for some people, the rate is much higher. Like in the last
Okay.
cohort that just finished, I had one student who had applied to like 20 jobs and he was getting an 80% response rate. And then another student
Ooh,
who's
okay.
applied to like 50 jobs and he's gotten a 15% response rate. So that number actually goes much higher if you're using the strategy of like applying to the right jobs, really calibrating yourself, and then also networking with people so that you get directly to the decision maker.
So the 80%, how many jobs that did that person apply to? I missed that part. The
That
80%
was like 20.
positive. 20. Okay. Hmm. So
Yep.
that means that instead of like mass applying, and now I think there are AI tools which you could just apply to thousands of jobs. You're like
Yeah.
very specific in terms of what kind of jobs you want to apply. and
Yeah.
then of course, okay, that leads to much better results. Okay, so I think I got a high level the resume part, and how do someone who does not have a background can sort of add some
Mhm.
positive things into their resume. Now let's go into the networking part, and networking
Mhm.
both for the unposted jobs as where you are
Mhm.
sort of creating a job for yourself, and then
Mhm.
if I find a job on LinkedIn and now I want to take the le- networking route, how do I go about it?
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of times when people think networking, people are like, "Oh my god, I really don't wanna do it. It's so cringy,
Yeah,
like, I feel like I
yeah,
have to sell my soul, blah, blah." And, like,
yeah.
the first thing I would just say about networking is, like, try to remove that kind of internal stigma about it. Like, try to look at it
Hmm,
as just making connections with people who you are
hmm,
genuinely curious about, either about helping them or learning about them, right? Like, curiosity goes a super long way. I've seen many, many students turn their genuine curiosity into a coffee chat that then turns into an entire job. So
hmm,
that's the first thing I would say about networking. There's so many different ways to go about networking. Like one way is, of course, on LinkedIn to craft a very strong message about what you bring to the table for that specific job. That's why you should also be targeted with the jobs that you're applying to, because if you're targeted, you can actually do research on the company and really, send a compelling message about why you
hmm,
resonate with that company. You saw the
yeah,
role and what is it that you really resonate with about that role.
hmm,
So much so that a hiring manager, it's like kind of hard to ignore you, right? They're going to be like, okay, this person genuinely seems like a good fit. Why would I not talk to them? Like hiring managers and recruiters, they want to be on your side. It's usually just that there's so
yeah,
many applications, they can't get to the bottom of
yeah,
it. So that's like a
yeah,
very low lift way of doing it, right? You can buy LinkedIn Premium,
yeah,
you have InMail for a few months. I think it's
yeah,
very worthwhile because people can really accelerate
yeah,
their job hunt this way.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
one end of the spectrum. Then the other end of the spectrum is like actually in-person networking, like going to events. You probably won't meet recruiters there because recruiters don't come to events, but like online events
yeah,
and in-person events where you can meet other data analysts or other people in the industry. Because what I
hmm,
find is my students learn so much more about the reality of the industry and what people are looking for through these conversations, right?
hmm,
Like if you watch YouTube videos about how to become a data analyst, that's going to teach you nothing compared to a real conversation with a real hiring manager. So those
yeah,
kinds of in-person events or online events where you connect with someone, where you're genuinely just asking them like, tell me a little bit more about your role. How did you get into this position? Right. And you approach it with curiosity, you make a connection with someone. Many times at the end of that conversation, someone will be like, I love your enthusiasm for the role. I would love to keep in touch if we open something up. Do you have a resume so that I can keep it on file? Right. And then later they get back in touch and then it turns into a conversation. So,
yeah,
yeah, there's many different versions of students who have kind of gone this way that is much more effective than just cold applying.
yeah. I totally agree with your point of that the hiring managers and recruiters, they are actually on your side. They are trying to find someone. I mean,
Mhm.
being on the other side of the
Yeah,
table, you get to see that it is actually a problem to hire good talent, right? And you have to
totally.
go through a lot of resumes, and you don't know what is being
Yep.
stated on the resume, how much does it actually translate into the skills, etc. So
Yep.
if you help them by showcasing your best version of yourself, and then
Mhm.
that makes their job easier as well as yours.
Exactly. That's a
um
good way to look at networking because we actually
yeah.
have in this current cohort, just as a side note, we have someone who is a director of talent. He in the cohort, he's
Hmm.
a former
Okay.
recruiter. He's a director of talent, so he obviously gives
Yeah,
us a lot of insight about what it's actually like on the other side of recruiting. And we had an
yeah,
office hours the other day where he was saying, he was like, "Guys, when you send out networking messages, you don't know how many people who are sending those networking messages are actually not qualified at all." Like maybe
yeah.
70 to 80% of those networking messages aren't good messages. They're not qualified. So if you write a
Hmm.
really good message that really shows how you can help, you are literally
Hmm.
you're helping someone. So like look
Yeah,
at networking that way because the recruiter wants to find you if you are a good fit for the
yeah,
job.
yeah, yeah. I think it applies to any selling. I remember a conversation. So someone was saying that selling on like door to door is like a very hard thing because you have to face a lot of
Mhm.
rejections and people don't want to open doors
Yeah.
for you. But then if you approach it from the mindset of there is someone who actually needs,
Mhm,
right, the stuff you're
mhm.
selling,
There's
and you
someone
do
looking
them a
for your
great
Girl Scout
favor, right?
cookies, like
Yeah,
exactly,
and you do them a great favor by showing up at the door with the right stuff. So yeah,
exactly.
I think that that applies to every selling. So what kind of in-person events are there where there is a good likelihood of hiring managers showing up and
Mm.
having that kind of conversation?
To be honest, I don't think that there are a lot of events where you can really expect to meet a hiring manager. It's more like the goal wouldn't be to come to an event to meet a recruiter or hiring manager. The goal would be to make connections with other people in the industry who, if you form a genuine connection with, number one, of course, they will hopefully have you in the back of their mind as like their team
Yeah,
grows, and that's more of a long-term game. But more
yeah.
like it gives you more exposure and information to the way people in the industry actually speak. Because when you get to an interview, there's a really big difference between someone who's never worked in a data role versus someone who has
Hmm.
done a lot of coffee chats. They have confidence about how people
Yeah,
in the industry talk, how they discuss the
yeah,
tools, how
yeah,
they discuss the nuances of the projects. And like, that's really the
yeah.
value of those kinds of in person events. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, but again, is it like the like conferences, or give me some
Mm.
example of what kind of
They're like it's a
events?
combination of different things. So, like, some of them could be data meetups, for example,
Hmm.
hackathons.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Some of them can
Hackathons. Yeah.
also be, like, online job fairs where there are other
Hmm.
people who are also in the same boat as you. Like, it's always good to also connect with people who are on kind of in the same
Yeah.
journey. So, online job
Yeah.
fairs, data meetups, especially if you're in a
Hmm.
big city, obviously, there's so many tech meetups, and there are so many
Yeah.
data analytics, data science
Okay.
panels and stuffs. So
Yeah.
just look up that, like other people who are enthusiastic about being in the industry.
Yeah.
They are, I wouldn't focus a lot of attention on that, to be honest. It's more like
Hmm.
it can really help you practice some of the soft skills.
Yeah. 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 It totally makes sense. And also to understand that what are the problems these people are having, and then developing a
Hmm.
lens of how you can solve those with data, and that really
Yeah.
reflects in your interviews. So I
Yeah.
totally agree to that. And any other tips on how to properly leveraging LinkedIn? Because I think this that's like a very
Yeah.
major tool when it comes to job search.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, job hunting is becoming much more of like a social game in a way. LinkedIn can be really helpful because it's basically a social resume if you think about it. So,
Yeah,
number one,
yeah,
the things that are on your resume, you should translate some of the best bullets to your LinkedIn. That's why when you do really good work on your resume, it helps you in like every other aspect because you can
of
just
course, yeah,
use some of those points and put it in your LinkedIn. Obviously, all the basics like have a nice picture, have a nice cover photo, all that stuff. And then also have keywords sprinkled throughout your LinkedIn. So that's also the value of having those kind of intermediary jobs where you can say things like data cleaning, data validation, non-technical
hmm,
stakeholders,
yeah,
presenting cross team collaboration. So like having those keywords in there can be good because when you send out a networking message to someone, they're going to want to see who you are, and they will probably go
yeah,
straight to your LinkedIn. Maybe
yeah,
not your
yeah,
resume
yeah,
first.
yeah,
So, yeah, and there are lots of like, small hacks on LinkedIn to find recent job posting, like search like hiring data analysts in the post and then filter through all the posts because you
yeah,
get the hiring manager then, you get who
yeah,
actually posted
yeah,
it. You
yeah,
can follow accounts of people who also like other posts that are posting
hmm,
new jobs, right? So you basically want to
hmm,
find like a more angled, like a more well-rounded approach to getting jobs surfaced to you than just doing the cold application on LinkedIn.
hmm, yeah. And tying it back to the previous thing we were discussing, that when you apply for a job, so we are talking about there's a posted job, let's say on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
you apply for that, and then you also try to use your network. So expand a little bit
Mhm.
more on that. So I applied on a
Yeah.
job on LinkedIn. Now what can I do?
Yeah, there's a lot here. One is after you apply to the job, if you can actually see the hiring manager, like who posted it, then you should send a networking message to the hiring manager, right? So that's where
Okay.
LinkedIn Premium can be worth it because you don't get
Yeah.
limited on their characters or your messages.
Yeah.
Um, And that's really the biggest thing. I have actually had some students take a very unique approach to networking where, one student actually had a background in sales. And so he knew how to do cold outreach very effectively.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
created something, a tool basically, that would batch email networking messages to people at the company that he was applying to, sending out a semi personal message directly to their inbox. And that led him to get a bunch of different interviews. That's obviously a way more advanced technique, but that's basically the
Yeah.
note there is like, you can also email people if you can find their
Hmm.
domain name and their
Emails.
name and all that
Yeah.
stuff. It's a little bit
Yeah.
more of an aggressive approach, but like I think the
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
standard one is within applying, within at least like 48 hours, like you want to catch it within the first few days of applying,
Hmm.
sending out that
Yeah.
networking message to a hiring manager with a really strong cover letter or really strong resume, really
Hmm.
strong examples of
Yeah.
your work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when so that is basically a connect with a custom invitation, right?
Mhm.
Message, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
think there is
The
no limit on
connection.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, well,
if
the
you're linked between
connection,
you.
like when
Yeah.
you first request, you can't say that
Yeah.
much, right? So it has to be very
Yeah.
short. It has to be like, was really
Yeah.
excited to
Yeah.
see about the recent job
Yeah. Yeah.
posting, thought I put along my credentials, like very short, and then you can send the longer
Yeah.
message.
Okay. Through email.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Um, and when you said that there are a few people who have like a very high conversion rate or application to interview ratio versus people
Hmm.
who have are on the lower side, what are the
Hmm.
differences there? What are the patterns?
Hmm. Yeah, it's pretty much the like opposite of what I was saying before. So when the conversion rate is low, it's usually one of two things. One, either the resume hasn't pulled out the right details, or they're applying
Hmm.
to jobs that are not yet right for them, right? And
Hmm.
this usually is for people who have no corporate experience. If you're applying to a
Hmm.
job at a large corporate company, there is a gap between where you are and what you're
Yeah.
applying to. And so for
Yeah.
those people, like you need to pivot basically. I always tell people once you get to
Hmm.
50 or 60 resumes, if you haven't heard back from anything, then we need to actually look at one of those two things and diagnose what's happening. So a lot of people are spraying and praying, right? They send out 100, 200
Yes.
resumes, they hear back from like
Yeah.
2%. And my
Yeah.
thing, what I say to them is like, you need to be an analyst, then you need to iterate on your strategy. Something is not working.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. Yeah.
either the first part of the funnel, which is the resume, or the second
Hmm.
part of the funnel, which
Yeah.
is what you're applying to. So it's basically a matter of
Yeah.
like looking at those two and figuring out where you need to pivot.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's. And what do you think is um, usually the success rate of fresh grads who have done some sort of
Mhm.
master's or bachelor's in
Yeah.
some tech field, and now they're trying to get
Yeah.
in?
I would say
What?
they actually have
Yeah.
some of the better, like best, they have
Okay.
more of the cards in their favor, right? Because people
Hmm.
understand like you probably don't have a lot of corporate experience if you just
Hmm.
graduated from undergrad. And also
Yeah.
more importantly, there's more opportunities open to them because there's internships. And
Yeah.
internships will be looking at whether or not you have a degree that's more recent. So I would actually say that the
Hmm.
recent grads like from undergrad or from boot camps or from grad schools in my program they've done very well because
Okay.
the net is also open to them right now.
Hmm. Hmm. And in their case, since they don't have experience, but they can showcase their data skills, their communication skills, etc., right, in the resume and highlight
Yeah.
that. Right.
So ideally, they would have like an internship or some kind of smaller work experience, right, from
Hmm.
school.
Yeah.
Then also having
Yeah.
a really strong portfolio. And then for some of them,
Yeah.
like having the program obviously helps, right? Because it's in
Hmm.
between educational program and
Yeah.
then also in between like an actual work experience. So
Hmm.
that's where like that bridge of being able to say program data analyst, it
Hmm.
really catches someone's eye because other undergrads are not going to have the same title.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting you mentioned portfolios because I personally have very strong opinion about portfolios. Whenever I am
Hmm.
on the hiring side, generally I don't have a lot of time to go through someone's GitHub and look at a lot of code, right? I just want to scan people quickly. And second, even if I find something on the link on their GitHub, there's there's no way of knowing if that person wrote that code, they copied someone else's code, or so. How, what's your experience been around portfolio, and how can someone who has no other way of showcasing their skills except portfolio how can they
Mhm.
have their portfolio differentiate, so that when it comes to a hiring manager like me who just tends
Yeah.
to ignore,
Yeah.
it's unable to ignore. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing with portfolio projects is like most people don't realize that the portfolio project is not going to get you the job. It's not even really
Hmm.
going to get a hiring manager to pay attention. Like it's the same for me. When I was on the hiring side, I wouldn't look at people's portfolios because actually most of the jobs that you're hiring for are not requiring a portfolio. Like they don't use the
Hmm.
portfolio to demonstrate that you can do the job. So
Yeah.
the biggest like myth that I want to just debunk for a sec for portfolio projects is that it's not about having the project on your resume or your LinkedIn, like being able to show it to people. It's about two things. One, doing the project so that in a rigorous and business relevant way so that you have real experience that you can talk about. And then number
Hmm.
two, it's used as a supplementary evidence when you are actually in the interviewing process that can really help you prove and give confidence to the other person that you have the skills that you're talking about, right? Like most
Yeah.
people in my program, they're not using the portfolio project to get the interview. What actually happens is they've done the projects through the program, and through that experience, they really know what they're talking about. Like they know how to use the
Hmm.
tools, they know the insights, they
Hmm.
know the recommendations,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
stakeholder questions, the visualizations.
Yeah.
Then in the
Yeah.
interview, by like round two or three, after they've had a good conversation, they basically send the
Hmm.
hiring manager their portfolio and are like,
Yeah.
hey, really enjoyed our conversation today. Like, just thought I
Hmm.
would send along some samples of my work. Most of the time,
Yeah.
the hiring manager, it actually prompts them to be like, wow, this is
Hmm.
excellent work. So it's only in
Hmm.
the later stages of the interview. Like, there's one
Hmm.
student, Jennifer, who I talk about in a video, who presented her portfolio project in the final round of the interview, right? In the
Hmm.
final round of the interview, it was 7-person panel, and they were so impressed that they gave her the offer at 30 minutes after the interview. But you can tell that that wasn't what got her the interview. It's actually what gave the people confidence that she knows what she's talking about by showing the
Yeah.
project then and there. And it's only
Yeah.
relevant for roles that are looking for 0 to 2 years of experience. Like beyond that,
Hmm.
portfolio projects are not going to matter.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of these things which we are discussing, networking, portfolio projects, they might not lead immediately to you having an interview, but all of these conversation, they do
Mhm.
enhance your understanding of
Mhm.
the situations, and then that
Mhm.
reflects when in your conversation and showcase you as a mature person who knows all the
Mhm.
nuances of the problems instead of just
Mhm.
theoretical bookish knowledge. Okay, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
um,
And I think a lot of times people look at the portfolio project as something to put on your materials, right? But it's more like, well, how else would you get the experience? That's really the main
yeah,
point. Like, how
yeah,
else
yeah,
would you
yeah.
play with the
No way.
tools? Like,
Yeah,
at some point, you need to
yeah,
do that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I totally understand. There, I mean, especially in tech fields, you learn by doing. So portfolio is
Mhm.
something you have to build. But
Mhm.
yeah, I had some doubts, which you also confirmed that when it comes to the hiring side, recruiters generally, and also HR, hiring managers, in the initial
Mhm.
filtering, they just don't have enough time to go through and validate
Yeah.
your portfolio
Yeah,
projects. Yeah,
exactly, in the
yeah,
initial filtering, but then when they
yeah.
ask a question like, "Tell me about a project you worked on, what challenges bump
Hmm.
into?" That is where the
Yeah.
good projects separate themselves from the bad
Yes. Yeah.
projects.
Yeah. 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 Because even when I'm on the other side of the table and interviewing, I want to have a deep dive technical
Mhm.
conversation with the person, right?
Mhm.
And if I
Yeah.
don't get that uh, opportunity, then it's sort of shallow. I'm just talking about different things. But
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
tell me that you worked on something, then I can go really deep into it and see that what's the depth
Yeah. Yeah.
of your knowledge. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and I think the biggest challenge with portfolio projects is it's hard to get that depth. Like, it's hard to know how to get the depth. Like, how do you get the right
Yes.
data? What questions are you asking? How do you tie
Yeah.
everything together? So then it becomes a little bit like a circular loop. Like you don't know what you're building, so then what you build doesn't end up being that relevant.
Hmm.
But I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people who are trying to break in. But that's also why I'm starting a portfolio project, like step by step series, like a playlist, because I think
Hmm.
people are just wondering, like, how would I actually start a project that's business relevant? The biggest thing is
Yeah.
like you really need to consider what kind of project shows that you have skills that are relevant to a company.
Hmm. Any company. Any company, or is it like
Um,
specific to their expertise which they're building? For example,
The
healthcare or
more,
anything.
I mean, yeah, the more industry specific, usually you want to strike a balance between showing that you have skills relevant to a specific industry, but I think it's more like the common data skills that are relevant to companies are the same across industries, right? Like making really good visualization, storytelling, finding the insights, building recommendations, understanding the metrics, understanding the dimensions, like those skills that you can show through your work. That's what you want to be able to show in a portfolio project, but it doesn't have to be super, super industry specific because you don't want to get locked into one specific industry
Hmm.
either.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else people should keep in mind when they are building their portfolio projects?
Um, Well, it's a lot of things, but I would say the most important one is one of the most important ingredients is just the quality of your data. Like you want to find
Hmm.
data that's actually business relevant. Don't use data that's like
Hmm.
Kaggle data sets, right? They're just like way
Yeah,
too clean, they're way too
yeah,
small, they don't relate to each
yeah,
other. Um,
yeah.
and
Give,
so
give me an example
there's
of
obviously,
such data set.
yeah, like how do you find this data, right? Like financial data, transactional data, marketing data, social media data, product data,
Hmm.
like all that stuff is stuff that many companies will use. You have to be a bit creative about thinking about how you find that data, which is something I'm going to be talking about
Hmm.
in the video
Hmm.
next week. Because a lot of times
Yeah,
when you use cleaned up Kaggle data sets, you just can't go that far. Like it's just very shallow. So it's
yeah,
very superficial data.
yeah, yeah.
So
True.
that's number one.
Yeah, yeah.
Data in, like the data you put in is
Hmm.
kind of like the quality of the project that you can get out of it. And then the other thing is just to
Hmm.
really use that as an opportunity to learn how to surface insights. Again, it's the biggest question of like how do you actually do that?
Yeah,
But that's the real
yeah,
opportunity is like learn how to get insights.
yeah,
Don't practice the technical tools.
yeah. Most of the portfolio projects I have seen, they are built around Kaggle or other publicly available.
Hmm.
I mean, the data has to be publicly available. Otherwise, it's very difficult for a person who is just getting started to get hands
Hmm.
to it. The other approach which I've seen people who are a little bit mature is that they get, so a lot of government institutes, especially cities, they publish their data. For example, you can get the
Hmm.
crimes data in New York City and the traffic
Yeah.
data and
Yeah.
all of that data, which is not being publicly used, and it's a big data that you can draw a lot of insights which are actually valuable, and there's no, it's like a very
Yeah.
open-ended problem, right? uh,
Yeah.
but it might not have a lot of business relevance per se,
Yeah.
right? uh,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of in terms of what kind of data which is not Kaggle, etc., and
Yeah.
has business relevance.
There are some companies that publish their data. So like Netflix, for example, I think a long time ago they
Hmm.
published their data on like movie and TV show watch times. And I had a student
Hmm.
who was interested in the entertainment industry, companies like
Okay.
Sony, and he actually had experience in TV and
Hmm.
film. So he used that
Hmm.
data set and he actually augmented it by using ChatGPT to add more dimensions to the data set
Oh, okay.
so that it had
Interesting.
more
Okay.
information, right? It was like it
Hmm.
has the genre, it has the year, it has the
Hmm.
filming
Okay.
location, it has the budget. Like
Hmm.
it's a lot of work, but that's one
Yeah.
way. So you take a data set
Yeah.
that's available by a company, you add some stuff to it
Hmm.
to make it more robust.
Yeah.
The other way actually
Yeah.
follows from my first point, which is finding volunteer opportunities, contract, freelance work,
Hmm.
or unpaid internships
Yeah.
or paid internships. Like that's the best
Yeah.
situation. You want a project that's in the real world, real experience.
Hmm.
Like I just mentioned with the current student who pushed herself to the
Yeah.
school. She now has
Yeah.
data that is like tracks all the enrollment rates and outcomes of a school, and it's actually like a funnel, like it's a recruiting funnel, which then is the same thing
Hmm.
as a marketing funnel. So
Yes. Yeah.
is that kind of stuff that like
Hmm.
people who are a bit more creative about different ways to get their
Yeah.
hands on their data, because data is like all around us. It's not locked away just in
Yeah.
companies, it's like everywhere. So it's more like
Everywhere.
making
Yeah.
connections to be like, hey, does
Hmm.
someone has a small business or someone's a social media influencer, like
Yeah.
can I get access to that
Yeah.
data and do a more legitimate project?
Yeah. Yeah. Um. Yeah. So let's say if I am a fresh grad out of a school and I've done some degree, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with data analytics, tech stack,
Mm-hmm.
etc. for a little bit, and I want to get my hands onto an unpaid internship. What are some avenues
Mm-hmm.
I can explore?
Yeah. So first of all, internships are obviously you have to look for them more, right? Because they're not super readily available on LinkedIn. So one is
Hmm.
like you can actually search in LinkedIn like hiring intern. And again, you will have to filter through more of them to actually find them. It's not going to be like as easy as just searching on LinkedIn easy jobs, but having a little bit of patience there means that you will actually stand out more because not as many people are applying to that. The other way is also to,
Yes.
like, a lot of students do it through their secondary network, where, for example, especially at small companies like startups or medium-sized companies, like
Hmm.
less than 200
Hmm.
people, if they have a friend who's working there or a connection who's working there, some parents' friends
Hmm.
who's working there at a small business, right? And basically being like, I have data analyst skills after you do some projects and you have a resume. And then you send them
Yeah.
your materials and are like, hey, I understand your company's business model. These are some of the metrics
Hmm.
that I understand you're probably reporting on. I would be happy to just start
Yeah.
creating and help you by creating a few reports and dashboards. So you kind of like nudge
Yeah.
your way in by getting confident in your
Hmm.
skills first so that you can pitch yourself to someone
Hmm.
else. And,
Right.
it might end up being like a 2-month contract or 3-month contract. I also had a student who went to a networking of, I don't know if it was really a networking event, but like a data event where she just had a really good conversation with someone about her interest in music. And this is a company that
Hmm.
designs, like, they do B2B microphone sales. So they do like musical equipment for governments and businesses. And she basically pitched herself as for doing an internship for 3 months. And now she has an opportunity that is like very legitimate data and very impressive business outcomes.
Hmm. Yeah. I was speaking with someone the other day. He graduated, he's an international student. So after graduating from his master's, there's a certain window between which they have to find a job, even if it is an unpaid job.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he said that he went to Wells Found, where a lot of startups are posting job, and
Hmm.
then from there found the companies which are hiring in data related roles. Went on LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
then started
Hmm.
sending people customized messages why he thinks he's the
Hmm.
best good
Yep.
fit. And after spending about um, I think 200 such connection in requests, he finally got a job, which is
Oh,
pretty cool.
nice.
Yeah. So there are some like non-profit um, opportunities. So there are websites which connect non-profits with people who have skills.
Hmm.
Have any of your students had any luck with that? I mean, does it actually work?
Yeah, yeah, totally. A lot of students have actually had luck with that. So, Bluebonnet Data, for example, which is like a data fellowship program where you can apply. It's a pretty open application process, I would say. It's like you do a 15-minute interview with
Hmm.
them, then you work as a campaign
Hmm.
data analyst on a progressive campaign. So, you actually are working with a
Okay.
real stakeholder who is like running
Hmm.
for political office. You work with other project managers and other people on the team. It's a 3-month experience where you're also getting mentored by someone technical. And so a few students have actually done that. And after that,
Hmm.
like one of them just landed an analytics engineering internship. And then the other one who did the fellowship from a few cohorts ago, she just became a market research analyst at like a Pilates
Hmm.
equipment company. And I
Okay.
think that that was basically the perfect in between step for them. So the fellowship is one example. Another example is like those websites that I talk about, which is the nonprofit organization volunteering platform. So like Catch a Fire or Volunteer Match, they're those opportunities are obviously they don't have as high of a bar. When you apply, if you have a pretty good portfolio, that obviously helps you stand out even more.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Um, I spent a lot of time in this conversation towards how to get to the stage of interviews. So I just
Hmm.
wanted to quickly go over the technical stuff. Once you get the interview, what are the some do's and don'ts? But the reason I spent so much time
Yeah.
on this is that I think this is probably much harder of a thing to get the interviews. Um, because again, if there are 1,000 applicants and the
Hmm.
hiring manager would interview, let's say 10, 15, 20 at most, right? So your
Hmm.
ratio is, your odds are like 1 in 90 or 1 in 100.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's why I just really wanted to dig deep into that and ask all the nuanceful
Yeah, sure.
questions. Okay, so once someone gets an interview,
Hmm.
then in terms of preparation, what kind of study plan you generally recommend to the people in terms of technical skills
Yeah.
and soft skills, whatever?
Yeah, definitely. So interviews are like a whole other world, obviously. Number
Yeah.
one is you should have like a whole list of the questions that you think you will be asked. There's always the
Hmm.
common questions you'll be asked. And then there's
Yeah.
the situational questions like tell me about a time. And then there's questions that are more like
Hmm.
business case questions. Then there's also the technical
Yeah.
interview and then also the business case interview, right? So there's always a mix of that
Yeah.
throughout the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number one, the biggest thing is like soft skills will always win the interview, even if you have really
Hmm.
good technical skills. I mean, you probably know because you
Hmm.
interview people, right? Like if someone is a 7 out of 10 on technical skills, but an 8 or 9 out of 10 on soft skills, I would have hired
Yeah.
someone like that
Yeah.
over the flip, over 9 out of 10
Yeah.
in
True.
technical skills and 7 out of 10 in soft
Yeah.
skills or lower,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
just like that is actually the core of the job. So,
Yeah.
practicing soft skills is huge, and you can do this a number of different ways. One, one, the best is obviously to practice with real people, which is
Yeah.
what we do. Like mock interviews is really important. It feels really awkward, but it helps a lot
Yeah.
just to understand
Yeah.
how you're actually perceived. Does someone understand what the heck
Yeah.
you're saying? And then also to
Yeah.
record yourself. So you want to have like
Yeah.
the full list of questions that you generally
Hmm.
will be asked for behavioral questions. You can use ChatGPT. There's tons of resources about this. Record
Yeah.
yourself and
Yeah.
watch yourself back,
Hmm.
which is very awkward. It's
Yeah.
very cringy. But
Yes.
if you
Yeah.
do that, you can really understand, like, oh, I'm not speaking clearly, or like, oh, I kind
Hmm.
of ramble actually, or I talk way too fast, or I'm not looking
Yeah.
at the camera, for example. So, especially
Yeah.
Zoom,
Yeah.
right? Like that all
Yeah.
has to be practiced. And also just to
Yes.
have the mindset that you might reasonably go through 3, 4 company interviews and not get that job. And that's not failure. It just means that it's actually giving you the experience to lead you to the right job, because each interview, if you learn from each one, it's a huge, like it's a lot of feedback for you, right? Even if someone doesn't give you
Yeah.
feedback, you kind of know why you didn't pass an interview. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that's the high level picture of how I look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very true that mock interviews. So when I was preparing for my meta interviews, I like did a lot of preparations back
Mhm.
then. One thing which really helped me was that there was a website where you could do peer interviews, so people who are applying for
Yeah.
FANGs, so you could just, and there I thought that, so then if we both show up, you interview me for 30 minutes and then I interview you. So it's both.
Mhm.
And even being on the other side, when I'm asking the
Mhm. Yeah.
questions, it was very insightful, even as a candidate, because I could see,
Oh,
okay,
totally.
yeah. So any
Yeah.
practice around
It's
interviews, I think it's immensely helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because like I think the confidence of students I observe, like their confidence not only comes from practicing, but actually by being the interviewer. Because something you
Hmm.
get empowered when you give other people feedback. Because even if you
Yeah.
don't know what the perfect answer is, you still can give feedback on the communication. And so
True.
if you don't have a buddy, you can also use
Yeah.
ChatGPT, like the voice
Yeah.
command, right? You can basically say,
Yeah. Yeah.
here's a job description. I have an interview. Can you
Yeah.
help me come up with some of the behavioral questions I might get asked by this hiring
Hmm.
manager? And then speak
Yeah.
to it and then be like, can you give me some tips about how to make this response stand out even more? So
Hmm.
you can practice that if
So you're
you
saying
don't
this.
have like a
So
buddy
you're
to
saying give
practice
the
with.
response as
Yeah.
well. Let it ask the question, and
Yeah.
you give the
In chat.
response, and then let it provide the critique. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Um, so then the technical interview is obviously a different thing, but especially for the behavioral interview, I think like the value of the behavioral interview practice can't be overstated. I think people are like, oh,
Yeah.
it's just gonna be asking questions about me. But still, the
Yeah.
communication style is still really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Christine, thank you so much for your time, and I really enjoyed
Yeah, thank you so
this
much for having me.
conversation.
It's fun.
And the thing I sort of loved about this is that I'm like genuinely very curious about the things I was discussing, and that's why I just
Hmm.
had so many follow-up questions based on the things we were discussing, and
Yeah, I love
it
it.
also shows your depth about the topic. That is
Hmm.
that you're able to answer all the nuances and actual practical
Every
problems
edge
people
case,
run into.
we have something
Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you. Yeah, thank you so
Yeah.
much too, Anwar. It's really fun to talk about everything with you.